start. I began my career in construction project management, got my master's in business, and transitioned into project management for product development. I got a really great opportunity to start developing and leading teams that were made up of program managers and product managers. And I fell in love with product management and delivering value for customers and, of course, making money. So I love this panel to talk a little bit about OKRs and how to apply metrics to businesses, because I've spent a lot of my career fine-tuning and thinking about what things matter to measure. I'll pass it off to Eloise.
Hey, I'm Eloise. I'm head of product at Bud, who are a fintech scale-up based in London. We're just moving into the US, so it's a really exciting time. And I joined Bud at the point we just raised our Series A, and we've raised our Series B, announced a few months ago. So it's kind of been a real evolution, both in terms of us as a company and how we measure things, but also in terms of product and our product team. So hopefully bringing some of that to the conversation. Originally I was an engineer and did a PhD in systemic design. So like thinking a lot about systems of people and technology and how things change and evolve over time. So yeah, Ken, what about you?
There we go. Couldn't get it on unmuted. I come at this in kind of an odd way, like Jackie. So I have a background, my undergrad's in industrial design that eventually evolved into application product design. I have a background also in instructional technology and educational technology, and so I've built simulators, products in the edtech space for the better part of 30 years. And currently I am Chief Product Officer for Sophos.ai. We're a low-code, no-code API developer for natural language processing. And also in my day job, I head up strategy and innovation for Wells Fargo's learning and development team. So interesting cross spectrum of stuff.
Great. Thank you all, and really again thrilled to be speaking with all of you today. Let's get started right away. And before I ask any questions, I just want to remind our audience that we want to keep this an interactive session. So please feel free to ask questions along the way, and we'll weave them into the conversation or address them towards the end. But please keep them coming, and that's really your best shot at getting maximum value out of this conversation. So let me get started, with really what's at the core of measuring what matters. The key question is, how do you decide, when there are so many different options of what you could be measuring and so many different metrics that might relate to your business? How do you prioritize what matters most? And, what's the process and framework that you follow? Jackie, you want to take that?
Yeah, I really like this question to kick off. I think it's based on the entire business, and really the heart of it is the goals for your organization. If you start with product usage as the core, what you're trying to drive, you might hit a ceiling and you might not deliver real value for your customers or business. It also doesn't allow you to change your metrics as you scale. So for example, a new startup will have different targets and aspirations for growth and revenue than a company looking to go public right out the gate. Across both spectrums, the product manager has to be thinking about their core user metric, which might be monthly active users, but also tracking operating expenses across the product.
Cool. That's helpful. Eloise, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree that it's all framed around your business goals, and those change at different times, right? So I think the temptation is to kind of say, well, actually, we care about all of these things. We care about adoption, we care about how people are using the product, and we care about retention. But any given time in the stage of growth, but also the time of year, for example, like you might just have a particular focus around a quarter that you really want to drive after for strategic reasons. And then that should frame what you're measuring. I think the caveat to that is that you should have consistent things that you are measuring. So each product team should have a set of things, maybe like 10, 20 metrics that they are tracking over time, and they're seeing how those change and evolve. But one of the things that I think is really, really important is the story that you tell around data. So what I really encourage product teams to do is like, yes, measure all of these things, track them over time, but have a focus at any given one quarter, go into look at the company goals, think about how your goals as a team tie into that, and then pick the metrics, the 1 or 2, maybe 3 at push, metrics that you're going to talk about in the business. Because what's really important is if you go and talk to someone commercial about a number you're trying to move, do they understand what it is? Does it feel aligned to what they're trying to achieve? And then you'll get far more impact and people will actually understand what you're doing. Whereas if you have loads of metrics that you just talk about, then you're not going to get as much focus and alignment.
Yeah, that's very well said, Eloise. Especially like building on, Jackie's point, bringing together the product stage, the time of the year even, and even tying all of that together into a story that actually folks in your organization can relate to. And again, picking things that matter at a given time, like in your planning, quarter over quarter and stuff, instead of like, just kind of going with whatever was decided in the previous planning cycle and stuff. That's great. Ken, curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I have a different spin on this just a little bit. So while the business metrics and the business results that we're trying to achieve are ultimately what determines whether the product is viable or not, the focus on the user, whether it's a consumer or whether it's a commercial sector, is as important, if not more important. And the inevitable success of your product depends upon whether or not they buy into it. And with agile manufacturing or agile development production techniques that are fully employed by most companies now, this is an evolutionary cycle of metrics. So you may have some core metrics that you're tracking, like monthly recurring revenue and licensing and cost. Ultimately, you also want to include things like focus group data and beta testing, and are you making the impact in the marketplace that you thought you were going to be making? And so ultimately, cost versus revenue is the sign of success. But in some businesses, that's not the only goal. In some businesses, it is, some products are considered a loss leader in order to be able to achieve a bigger goal or a larger strategy for the organization. So they vary. And the key thing is making sure that the communication path between all the stakeholders, and that includes the end customer, are established and well maintained throughout the life cycle of the product.
Ken, I love that you said this idea of customer centricity, is as we start to even think about customers more broadly, not just paying customers. You can look at free users and look at your free to point to conversion and your dual flywheel mechanisms as a product business. And maybe you are at any given point in time, to Eloise's point, focusing and optimizing on those specific pieces based off of what your business is trying to accomplish. Like if you're wanting to absorb different markets or move into tangential spaces, your strategy can definitely change, and therefore your metrics and OKRs are also going to change. So that's really astute.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I found quite interesting in a B2B business, so we're a fintech, we take in our clients' transactional data and we provide value for them, like across the lending space. They personalize their mobile banking apps using this data. Is actually their success for them is often aligned to things only they can measure. So those are not necessarily things we can measure on our side. So in terms of like, what should you pay attention to? Yes, you should have your internal things you're measuring, but you're also going to have to really understand that customer and what success means for them. And it might be that you need to find that out through things that they're measuring rather than things that you can directly measure, which makes things a lot harder, but is also just like the reality of if you're going to be successful or not.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting that we've found is that the customer service component, while oftentimes thought of as an afterthought with your product, it is now so integrated into the product itself. And the success of your product often depends upon just how effective that help desk or that contact center plays a role. And so you have to make sure that you're tracking it as if it is a part of the product or a separate product all on itself. And that's a new thought process for a lot of companies.
Yeah, great point actually. Love how customer service and communication with customers really came out as one really significant point in coming up with your metrics or prioritizing them. Yeah, and really that's the measure part, because unless you're listening to your customers and actively measuring the feedback you're getting objectively, very hard to kind of channel that input. And that input is really a gold mine, and very hard to channel that without that communication channels flowing into your OKRs and your metrics. Yeah, great discussion. So moving on from how you pick your metrics, like something that Eloise touched upon earlier as well, in terms of goals. When you're setting goals for your organization, for your team, um, the industry as a whole, including proponents of OKRs, they've gone back and forth on how much to bite off, right? Like the early proponents, they, you would typically settle in at 70%. This goes back to my time at Google in early 2000s with OKRs. Really, 70% was a good goal. And then, later on, as I saw the transition that Google made into Google Cloud, that there was this push towards ensuring that you are signing up 100% for your OKRs, or that they shouldn't be in your OKRs at all. So I would love to hear your take on how do you guys kind of come up with OKRs, the right balance between what's achievable and what we should all be striving to achieve.
Sure. Yeah. So at company level, I mean, we aim for 70%. And I think it's important across the breadth of your OKRs to get a range there, right? So you can have some that are more ambitious and that some that you're like, more certain about. Nobody wants to get to the end of a quarter or whatever planning cycle you're using, and for you to have missed all of your OKRs. That's not great for morale and kind of feeling good about your goal setting. I think, it's important to be ambitious. I also think sometimes there are just things you have to do for a business reason. So they're like, you're just like, actually, for us to progress to the next stage as a company or for this product, we need to achieve this thing. And you kind of know that from the market and from talking to customers and all the research that you've done. So often it's useful to actually flip it and say, okay, well, if we actually have to achieve this, like, are we set up to do that? Do we have the right team in place? Do we have the right things on our roadmap? Do we have to rejig some of the missions and focuses that we have across the business? So I think a lot can be achieved by also asking, like, what do we strategically need to achieve? And like, how do we do that? Because most things are possible if you set things up in the right way. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think certainly at Bud, we're moving very fast, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing is quite on the edge. So we're quite often in discovery mode. So it's not actually always easy to just say like, okay, right, we're going to increase this number by 10%. Like there's a lot of experimentation and iteration that's going on around this. So I actually prefer to use kind of KPIs at the team level that feed into the high level company goals.
Excellent. Very interesting, Eloise. Yeah, thanks for that perspective, especially, your focus on like how. I think, a lot of times, like going over how really drives home the point about what is achievable versus what's not. I would love to hear, what our other panel, Jackie, you want to share your thoughts on that?
Certainly. So when I think about the balancing of ambition with attainable goals, you have to that there's a couple of different things that are in line. One is your overall strategy, a product market fit. And sometimes you're setting an ambitious target, but in the end you're sandbagging because you have such a great product market fit and you hit it out of the park. Or more commonly, you think you're going to be able to attain something and you set something so hard and high, and then your team goes out there and is burning themselves out because they're really unable to even hit that 70%. Eloise, I love that you said that 70% because I agree. When I'm setting OKRs or even usage targets with my team, I say, okay, well, let's push the line and go up a little bit more. But I've definitely been in a couple of cycles, especially with some of the COVID pandemic our targets were at one point in one quarter, and then all of a sudden we get hit by this pandemic and the economy shuts down. And even though in the developer space our growth was still higher than other industries, we did see a slowdown because hello, it's a pandemic. People were changing lives and there was layoffs and everything was happening crazily. But in the macroeconomic sense, you have to kind of temper. And as we're going into a recession, that will be really important for us in the software industry to consider as well. Because now I'm considering, how do you think about doubling down on your depth and getting that metric right. So ambition might be a little bit tempered in this coming time because the macroeconomic environment. I also would say, when I think about how do I find that perfect number rather than just saying 70%, I usually think about historical forecasts and looking at what does the past tell us of what we were able to obtain, and based off of if there's any M&A in the future, or if there's certain large customers in the next couple of year pipeline that could really shift our trajectory, then I use that to inform what metrics could grow or not grow significantly. It's really a pipeline game. And then, of course, talking with my go-to-market partners to consider what are they forecasting in bookings. Because, of course, if they're going to forecast a slowdown in bookings in the second quarter, we might not see as much of the drive for certain product usage as we normally would. So those are kinds of the two dimensions when we're looking at ambition versus attainability: the macroeconomic environment and then how our company is performing in that environment.
That's a great point, Jackie. Really touched upon a lot of useful ideas there. In fact, one that I'll just kind of add something to is working with your go-to-market partners, for example. So, this OKR setting exercise is as much about your peers in other organizations or other functions as it is about your team. In fact, really, it is more about your peers than it is really about your team, because ultimately the OKRs are for your team or for your org that you're responsible for, but really the input comes from rest of the organization. Also goes back to Ken's point from the previous question about feeding in the customer service data and that feedback that you might be getting from horizontally across the organization and channeling that into OKRs. Ken, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting, especially I have like this split personality with the two companies I'm associated with, is that the OKRs and the targets that we're going after vary based upon the company, and so no single model fits everybody. If you were to say, okay, I want to replicate what Wells Fargo is doing. And I'm just going to take and lift it and put it over here, and we're going to follow the same OKRs and the same percentages, and we'll be successful as a result of that. And the answer is no, that's not the case, because they vary based upon your audience. At Wells, my audience is internal, so the customer that I have is 270,000 employees. And the products that I'm building or that my team is building affect those. And so when COVID hit, going back to Jackie's point, when COVID hit and all of the activities and the products that we had were focused on being able to deploy them either in an in-person situation or in be able to ship product across the country with no issues around sanitization and other things. COVID killed it, and it killed it in 3 weeks. And we had to rapidly change all of our OKRs. We had to rapidly change all of our products to now adjust to this new marketplace. And so, when you think about that, you go, okay, so what does that mean as we're looking at where we are right now? And I mean, we're in a recession. It's not even a matter of if. We are in a recession right now. And every 4 to 8 weeks, something is changing, as the Twitter layoffs and the Amazon layoffs and the umpteen other dozen companies that have gone through layoffs will tell you. And their entire product marketing strategy and their entire product strategies are altering based upon changes in revenue projections. And so those OKRs just went out the window. I mean, they were established and now they're gone. They're now being reconfigured. and it's happening more and more quickly today than ever before. So the traditional means of establishing what those benchmarks are, while they're not negated, they are having to change to meet the current trends in the marketplace. And some of this doesn't even have to do with the economy. Some of it is just the market itself is changing so rapidly. I mean, it used to be you could do a 5-year projection and we're going to do stuff over here and this product's going to roll out. We may have a couple of iterations, but we can hit these milestones and these OKRs and we're fine. And we'll hit them at 70, 80% because historically that was the case. History right now, while it's good to look back and learn from the past, it may not be 100% relevant anymore. And that's the trick. It's a mind shift set, especially for folks that have been in the business for a long time that are now having to come to grips with, hey, this has changed. And the stakeholders now have to look at things differently. So
I have a question for everyone. Have you all done any sort of OKR planning where you solicit feedback from your teams, also like a bottoms up planning and then a tops down reconciliation? I'm interested to hear if that's something that you've used to kind of temper the ambition while still thinking through meaningful value to drive.
Well, for the internal stuff that we were doing at Wells, yes, because we didn't have a choice. We were faced with, okay, we're 3 weeks into this thing, everything has changed. Please, dear God, somebody have some ideas. I mean, really what it came down to, and we totally altered the path of what we were trying to do. And so, yeah, so sometimes it doesn't, you just have to.
That's kind of a counterculture thought to OKRs, where you sort of set them in the beginning and then you measure to it and whatever happens, happens. So there isn't this idea of where you pivot or you change, because if it's going to go to 0%, it's 0%. You learn from it and you retrospect it on the end of your quarter. But I like this idea of having more elasticity in your decision making, because it does allow you to be responsive to your market changes. Eloise, I want to hear your thoughts on bottoms up versus tops down.
I think the bottoms up, I mean, I kind of think it's almost essential, like, because often what happens is, I was talking earlier about, like, you just have a business goal that you like need to achieve. And it might be like, hey guys, we need to like launch this thing in a new market. And then, you can break that down into key results. You go and talk to teams and they're like, oh, actually we have this other thing and we're going to do this. And we really need to achieve this other thing for this thing. And like that iteration cycle, I think, is like an essential part of your OKR planning. And often that can spark really good conversations between product teams and kind of senior leaders, where, you're bringing in more context about what's happening on the ground, and you can kind of make them more realistic. I think the thing about like, just go for it and we'll see where we're at. Like, I feel like when we first started using OKRs, it was kind of like that, because you're just like, okay, we'll just try some things. And also particularly when we were an earlier stage company and things were more chaotic, like sometimes you would get halfway through a quarter and be like, actually, this thing is no longer relevant to us. It's not moved, but we don't care about that because we actually have learned this. And that means we care about this other thing. So I think like as soon as you get to the point where everybody's just talking about the OKR instead of the goal, then that's like an issue. And you should always be framing it in that wider context.
What's interesting is it's almost like we're at a stage where we're doing agile OKR. Okay, so you set a minimum viable OKR, and then as the product progresses,
everyone heard that here first. I feel like agile OKRs is going to be like the next product that comes out in the market. You heard it here first with Ken. Keep going.
So I was just sketching it down, but the idea is that it is something that every sprint cycle you go, okay, are the OKRs still relevant? And it's not just for the product. Is the market even still relevant? Is the trending TikTok that's going on right now, did it just kill our entire product and now we have to reshuffle the deck? I mean, that's how fast this is happening.
I think that really relates to the level you set the OKRs in the business as well, particularly for kind of scaling organizations. It's like, when we first started using OKRs, we went for the like, okay, what's the methodology here? So at every single level, we have OKRs right down to people, and very quickly realized that actually the change that happens at the individual level and even at the team level was so much that it didn't actually, you kind of lose the sense of where that's going very quickly, and they kind of become irrelevant. So I think for us at this point, like just having the really clear company ones makes sense. I think as we scale, as we're we'll need other layers in that. But just being a bit realistic about like what is actually useful here and what is going to not change enough to be useful.
So it sounds a little bit like you're using management by objectives. So like MBOs versus OKRs, because OKRs have that master of cascade, whereas you have MBOs where you set that top level objective and everybody has goals and actions that roll up to that.
Yeah, kind of. I think it's probably like sits somewhere in between, because all the teams have like KPIs, which they are like saying, okay, we'd like to move this in this direction by about this much, but we're just like not tracking it in the same way and with the same level of like, you know, they're not all like, not every single person in the company knows what like, you know, it's not like reported in the same way. It's definitely just like more flexible.
Yeah, I love this discussion, you know, the point about agile OKRs and everything. So really, really interesting. You know, one thing I would just quickly add to that is, you know, in the bottom up versus top down approach, it definitely, in the bottom up is absolutely, you know, very helpful. And I think a lot of leverage can be exercised by putting the right forums together. So, you know, the OKR planning is not a process that needs to begin when that time frame is starting. Let's say if you have quarterly OKRs, they don't necessarily have to begin then. If your forums are put in place beforehand, then some of these inputs could be coming in live and, you know, being kind of staged for the next phase of OKR planning. So really it's a continuous process. And again, another aspect of how agile OKRs can be, right? They don't have to be planned right then and there. Could be happening before and again replanned while we are going through that. So I'll actually segue into something that Eloise mentioned a little bit earlier. She's talking about team KPIs and how, you know, she's seen kind of team KPIs being channeled into metrics and OKRs. So, you know, when it comes to talking about metrics and especially tying OKRs to specific metrics, one key question is, you know, what do you measure, right? How do you come up with that? And in some cases, and you know, this is also very good question that we got from Lena on the forum here. So she was asking, especially from Alice as well, can you give some examples of the types of measurements you use for areas that are in high level of discovery or iteration versus not? So things which are, let's say, more crystallized versus not, how do you come up with metrics for those? And also another aspect I would like, you know, to hear from each of you is, how do you come up with the metrics that you can influence rather than lagging indicators? So how do you kind of, you know, zero in on the leading indicators, which is really where, you know, at OKR planning, that's probably most helpful. Yeah, Eloise, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Yeah, there's quite a lot in there, and kind of in answer to Lena's question, one of the things that I was thinking about is we do quite a lot of machine learning, and we constantly have this debate, right? Because like one of the things that we do is we categorize transactions, which is like, sounds like a simple problem. You take in a transaction and you say whether it's groceries or your insurance bill or whatever it is, and is actually really, really hard problem to solve. And what our clients would love is if we just tell them like how accurate that is. But like, actually, that's a completely meaningless measure. So if we do something like, hey, we take that categorizer and we apply it in a new market, there's a whole load of numbers and metrics that the team care about and track. But there's not really, we don't put so much like, we've got a sense of like what is good and what good numbers look like, but there's not really any reason for us to be prescriptive about that, because we'll just improve it over time based on the amount of data that we have and how much we want to invest in it. So yes, we need to track those numbers, but it wouldn't really make sense for me to just be like, yeah, you need to get this number to hit, because it's like, okay, well, we can do that, but it's going to cost this much, and we're not going to really know if we're going to hit that number until we've done like 2 months of work. So it's kind of like a slightly meaningless process to go through, and really like you've got to say, how much do we want to invest in this, approximately where are we adding to, and then like just review where you're at. So it's maybe a bit of a like niche example, but I also think potentially, and I'm kind of really interested in others' thoughts on this. It's slightly different in some B2B situations than B2C situations, because it might be that you don't get kind of real usage data until the point where, you know, the product has to be quite good and ready to ship to an enterprise client. So the types of things that you're looking out for are slightly different in that situation.
Yeah, that's great. Jackie, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, when I start to think about how to decide what metrics to use, to kind of building off of what Eloise was saying, of like, you can't just anchor on one and say that that's the truth, what you follow it for the rest of eternity for that product line. I think Pirate Metrics framework, the AARRR framework, which shows the journey of a user from an acquisition to revenue. And this will help you pinpoint where your users are, where the adoption is of your certain product that are just beginning to be built or that are in long-term profitability, because it's a product growth, you know, mindset. It's to how do you think about taking either a mature product or even a newly launched product and seeing it through that entire funnel. Whenever I do a first launched product, I really focus on that top of the funnel. What are users doing initially? How long does it take to get them to use the product? And then at that point, when that product reaches the retention, where there's multiple uses or multiple purchases of that particular product or feature, that in my mind is when it transitions to a mature product. And then I start looking at things like gross margin or operating expenses, or how well this person up tiers or becomes a paid user. So those are all the ways that you can look at a newly launched feature and see how many times they're coming back to that feature, that product, how well they're using it, at what point do they stop using it, and then that can lead you down the journey of what do you need to improve to acquire new users, or how do you go deep with that one user and get them at the end to the revenue and even to the referral stage.
Yeah, it's great, Jackie, how you related this to the Pirate Metrics framework and how kind of, top of the funnel, kind of getting, real metrics and measurability there can help you better understand conversion further down the line. So that's a really effective leading indicator. In fact, that brings me to something that Ken had brought up earlier. So this is also kind of a great segue into the next question, and I would love to kind of start, by hearing Ken's thoughts on that. So Ken, you were talking about like how, for example, with the pandemic and stuff, business and strategy is not what it used to be. It's changing very fast, and also something that Eloise mentioned just now, that a lot of times when you are let's say pivoting, or let's say launching a different product offering or modifying your existing offering in a significant manner, you don't even have real product usage data, right? So in an ever-changing world where typically measurement is going to, it seems always lag, just kind of playing the devil's advocate here, always going to lag your decisions, right? How do you kind of come up with a data-driven strategy? How do you kind of ensure that alignment is continuously happening between your strategy and your goals and your metrics?
So I'm going to hypothesize on something here because it's something I've been wanting to try but haven't been able to do yet. There are tools. I'm gonna throw out one name just because it happens to be from in the area where I'm from. Pendo.io has a product that provides a variety of analytics and data tracking for product development and product management and product design. And it also provides guides so that you can onboard, do digital adoption faster. One of the things that's interesting about it, and this is the experiment I want to go with. I know that it's been successful at other companies, which is it has an analytics capability to be able to tell how much of the product that you're producing, that you're rolling out, actually is used by the end user. So if you have a selection of features and functionality, like Photoshop, for example, Adobe Photoshop, most people use about 20% of Adobe Photoshop. There's a lot of features and functionality, but they use about 20%. which means they're either paying for a lot of things that they're not using, or they just don't know that they could. And with machine learning and AI, going back to Eloise's point earlier, you should be able to do analytics on your users as they're using the product and provide recommendations on using the other features that they're not using, even to the point where they may then in turn buy other products from you or other services like clip art, like fonts or whatever value add that you can do. So the OKRs around that are and even just the straight up KPIs on this are, what can we do with information that we can gather about our users and about the product and the effectiveness of it, that in turn generates or results in either MRR or additional licenses or whatever the case is, or improves conversion rates from the free version or the lower grade version, basic level version, to a higher grade version of a product. Pendo.io is the name of the tool. But that then rolls back to other types of measurements. So operating leverage, for example, you can spend a lot of time on a feature or a functionality of a product and get very little margin out of it. And matter of fact, it may actually do the reverse of what you think it's doing, because of all the other levers that are involved from your development team, from your sales team, from your product design team. And so, those things can get calculated in there as well. And with the advent of machine learning, and especially with a lot of these products going into software as a service, you can track more data now than we've ever been able to track before, to see about the use, how people are using it, how people are buying it, how people are being influenced into it. And you can do correlation studies between, advertising and not just advertising by your product, but advertising by other products that lead to your product being in more demand. So those are the kinds of things where you start looking at the metrics and you go, the metrics involved in this are much broader than we've ever experienced before. And we now have tools like ML and AI that allow us to gather and process that data in ways that we could never do by hand. So I know that's a lot of words for a short answer.
No, that's excellent. I think tying it together to with the AI and ML point of kind of predicting what might help, recommending based on that, is very helpful. Jackie, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
On which part? Because Ken has a lot of different threads that I could pull on, but which part would you want to hear?
Yeah. So, as questions are rolling in, I would also request our audience to please, submit your questions on the Q&A, and we'll address them in a few minutes. But specifically, like for example, there's one from Frank on metrics changing over time, and your strategy, your business strategy is changing. Your metrics are getting outdated. Some are not as relevant anymore. To Ken's point, they may not relate as well. Your existing metrics may not relate as well with your actual business outcomes. So I'm just curious, what is your approach in ensuring some basic hygiene of metrics that you've put in place, or KPIs that you've put in place? Because the wrong metrics, really may put you in a much worse spot, right?
It's a really great question. I do think there's some metrics that are at the top of the business that will always be timeless, like revenue, customer acquisition, cost to acquire new customers, lifetime value of a customer, your average sales price. So like if you're thinking about those metrics as the ones that are driving your OKRs and those KPIs and the way that you drive those as a product line, then I think that those will tell you that you're doing something wrong on the usage front. But there's things like vanity metrics around cost of generating emails or count of emails in your platform or count of clicks on a particular page that get quickly outdated as people start to use or abuse your platform. So when I start to think about how do you validate those metrics, it's a two-pronged approach of qualitative and quantitative. You need to be interviewing your customers every quarter to make sure that you're looking at the micro usage of your product and confirm that they are using your product as you're intending to. Can't tell you how many times I've built a feature with this idea of what I thought it was in my mind, and then I watched somebody use it unmediated and they abused what I beautifully spent time designing and delivering with my team. So there's that the continuous evaluation with your customer base and your users, where you watch them use your product. And then of course there's that, how do you look at your revenue model and make sure that you're reconciling those things on the quantitative side. So if you're seeing that you have really low usage, but you're driving a lot of revenue in those areas, is it because this is your telemetry is wrong? Like you're not tracking the right thing and it's driving actually a paid feature? So there's that qualitative piece where you actually have to be in front of your customers, validating your features and validating your products. And then there's, of course, the data analysis side, where you can create those models, where you can use natural language processing, where you can look at the data that you have collected and see if that's telling the truth.
That's great. That's great, Jackie. Thanks for your insights on that. Eloise, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with both of those points. I think just like to build on them a bit. On the first one around qualitative, like using these two things in pairs, I think part of that is also like how you collaborate across the business. So like one example that we have is we have customers connect their bank accounts using our flow. So like conversion is a really important metric for us, like how many people are getting through that banking flow. I could talk about, pairing that with how many people start the flow. But one of the things that we find is conversion is directly impacted by how clients implement the feature on their side. So they're using our API, but they can impact the flow in some way. So like for us, having a really clear idea that we've built up over time that like, a lender should expect this level of conversion. If they're a different type of lender, we'd expect, that conversion would vary even more. If it's like, an HSBC, their conversion should be something like this. And being able to monitor that even at a client level and then go have those conversations. So for example, like one conversation that happened recently is like, hey, we spotted your conversion is lower than what we would expect. And the only way we can dig into that is like, how have they actually implemented this feature, which we need the client team to help us with. And have that conversation about, hey, do you know that if you actually do these things or tweak it in this way, then you can up conversion? And it's like, like you can't separate it from those conversations that happen and that research that you've got to do and that qualitative side.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, that's great, Eloise. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And there's actually somewhat, I would say, like loaded question that's also come in from Lina, and this is just kind of following up, I guess, from the previous question. It's a very good question, though. Let me just read it out. Do you see value in investing in factor or attribution modeling? If yes, what framework do you use to decide where to deep dive with factor or causality modeling versus doing something more directional like attribution modeling? So just to kind of rephrase latest question, I think this is again kind of thinking about what kind of metrics are helpful, and going back to Jackie's point in terms of identifying the leading indicators, because a lot of times you might have a ton of upstream metrics, but it's unclear which of those are actually influencing your downstream metrics or your lagging indicators, if you will. And understanding where the correlation is. Again, something that Jackie mentioned earlier about, there's some North Star metrics, it's a revenue. Now, what are your actual leading indicators that correlate a lot with that? And again, the Pirate metrics framework, folks who are coming in for, let's say, free trials, the marketing channel that they might have come by, right? That might be a strong factor ultimately governing how they convert. Yeah, Jackie, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so as a product leader, I don't spend a ton of time in attribution models from a marketing perspective. I typically look at the first interaction and last interaction, which tend to then feed into an attribution model for a marketing flow. When we do look at product-led growth, BLG, those are also the moments in time that end up, saying that this is a product qualified lead, a PQL. So I would say first interaction is probably the model that I see most commonly as a product leader. When I'm thinking about being a general manager and how I look at my entire business, I've also seen things like linear attribution, where you look holistically at your marketing strategy rather than that single event inside of your platform. I would say that requires a lot of instrumentation, though, across your entire platform, and it's not just feature based. And it really helps to have a P&L for each product manager. I'm in an organization right now that doesn't have a P&L per product line. It's a platform. So it's really tricky when you're starting to try to drive accountability for each product manager when you don't have the metrics or you don't have the tie back to revenue. It's easy to do at a holistic tier level, which is how I currently drive value with each of my product managers and managing the team and managing expectations and how to set goals. That's why I keep harping on things like revenue, because it's so easy for my current organization to tie the paid tier back to the accountability in the product manager. Because that's what we're doing with OKRs. You're trying to drive results and accountability. And the only way to do that is to find the thing in your organization that indicates return on investment, your ROI. So sorry, Alina, don't have a really great answer for you. I've kind of modeled the different things that I have seen, but my real experience hasn't been between factor or attribution modeling. Maybe Eloise or Ken have a different experience on that front.
Well, not more recently, but in the past, I worked with some organizations where we dealt with what we called wicked problems. And wicked problems are the ones where either you've got multiple lines of business or multiple product lines, and you have a ton of levers or factors that are happening on the outside that are impacting, that are out of your control. But it's the intersection and the connection of all of those levers and how they play off of each other that causes this massive rippling across the landscape of your business. And oftentimes it is very difficult to isolate one specific lever and say, we need to adjust this metric because this is causing all the problem. And come to find out, it's more of a rippling effect. I know one of the questions earlier, which is, why do you choose specific metrics? And determining that why is not just a pinpoint isolated case. It's often, getting into the mindset of the leader of that line of business or that product and saying, why did you make that decision, or why did you choose to do this? And because it cascaded across all the other businesses in unforeseen ways. And that's where communication and a solid network, a relationship between your business unit managers is critical to the success of your organization, because that then ripples down to or trickles down to the entire design product design team.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ken. In fact, just building on what you and Jackie just said, excuse me. In my experience, OKRs and metrics and all of these really, they're definitely a framework for growth in an organization, for alignment with strategy and stuff. But they're also a framework for communication, for kind of talking to each other in a common, consistent language, so that people understand what matters and how one team can influence another team's output and so on. So from that point of view, metrics can really help tie together different functions and how the influence that they have on each other. Going back to something that Ken mentioned at the very beginning, like if you're not paying attention to feedback you're getting from customer service, then no matter how much smarts you're putting into your metrics and stuff, or how closely you're tracking your OKRs, it's not going to help. So therefore, these kind of metrics, putting the right forums in place, and then using them as a framework for really aligning across the organization for communicating. That is really the gist of it. And again, great points that I heard from our panelists today on that one. Alois, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think they are absolutely a tool for doing that, but I also think the communication can help you figure out a lot of the questions that we're trying to answer as well, about like, why are you picking this metric? Which metric should we care about? Because if you make someone go and communicate, hey, I'm tracking this thing, and they have to explain to like different parts of the business why that's important, you'll very quickly like figure out, is that the right thing to measure? Because you'll go and get like blank stares, or just like, why do you care about that thing? Our business priority is this thing. So I think like often quite a useful thing to do is like, and especially in terms of that like accountability piece, is make someone responsible for going and communicating a thing, and going shouting about it in the right forums, and then they'll figure out if they're measuring the right thing and if that's the most important thing, and get alignment that way as well.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, Eloise. And actually, we are just running towards the end of the time. So there are actually several questions I received on DM as well, and I don't think we'll have time to go over all of them. But there was one specific thing that might be useful to touch upon. So when you're building your org and you're interviewing for a candidate, like, can someone just summarize on what's your strategy for identifying a data-driven person, someone who's kind of got sufficient maturity around metrics or OKRs, and versus someone who might not have that kind of background. Is there like something you look for in hiring? Jackie, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, for sure. So typically I have a mix of questions with my interview that includes application questions, situational questions, and of course, experiential questions. My favorite questions to ask in the interview are the application ones, where I get to see how their brain works in practice. So typically I'll ask a question on like, hey, so you're here day one of your job and you are trying to drive revenue for your product. What's the first thing you do? And that usually tells me, okay, well, if I'm going to go and hit the ground running and just interviewing customers, well, that's one approach. But a data analyst mind is going to go, well, I'm going to see what's been done, and I'm going to look at the books and look at the data that's been collected and make an informed strategy on how I'm going to research and go to market with a product. And that's typically where you start to see a fork in the road of like external facing product managers and internal facing product managers, but also the people who have used data to grow their products. And the one that's customer interviewing focused in that one might be a great product manager for your product that you're looking for. That's not something to discount, but if you're focused on driving someone who has experience using data, if you ask them, how are you going to drive revenue for your product? Guaranteed the first thing they're going to do is, I'm going to try to create my funnel for that product. And that is your data person.
Yeah, that's very well said, Jackie. Thanks so much for sharing that. So, we'll quickly summarize the session. I think this is really a very useful session for me, certainly, and I hope for all of you as well. Got lots to learn from the perspective of all our presenters today. I think we touched upon how to come up with the right set of metrics, kind of tie them across the different business functions. Really kind of aligning strategy and metrics all together, how you can channel that into your OKRs, and then how to set OKRs so that they are realistic, achievable, and moving the your path forward. And I think the most important takeaway, the term that we coined here, agile OKRs, that's something I'm going to take back with me and use that in my day job. Thanks so much to all of you for that. And with that, I'll hand it over to James. Really, thank you, Alois. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Jackie. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I agree. I couldn't agree more, Abhishek. I thought that was a really, really interesting session. I've been making some notes while listening in, and I agree. The Agile OKRs is definitely, you heard it here first, so that's an exciting development for sure. And I just want to add my thanks as well to NetSpring for sponsoring the session, and Abhishek and for you taking the role of moderator, and I thought it was a really great conversation, so thank you to everyone. we're going to move into the next session then. So when you exit out of here, it'll take you back to the agenda. You can click on the next session and that'll load up the room. There'll be a little 15-minute wait or so just while we set everything up and get things ready for you. So we'll see you in about 15 minutes time. Thank you all.